Hello and welcome to Making Detection and Response a Business Priority and how to explain the value to the board. This webinar is brought to you in partnership with Adarma as part of the Minimising the Impact of a Breach series, which has included a set of 4 podcasts that can be found below the video screen. My name's Catherine Cave. I'm Associate Editor of SC Media and your host for the next hour. What we're going to be looking at today is that the last year has been characterised by disruption. Boards are balancing competing priorities as they endeavour to help their organisations navigate an era of accelerated change. And within this, it's absolutely critical that security operations are not siloed, because a breach can cause a tremendous business interruption. This session will look at key decisions needed when dealing with that inevitable breach and how to limit its consequences. And to discuss this, I've got a fantastic panel of 5 speakers from a variety of different companies who are all going to introduce themselves now. So if I can start with you, I've got Sheryl Martin from Adarma. Could you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Catherine. And as Catherine says, I'm Sheryl Martin. I head up our consultancy practice here in Adarma. Absolutely delighted to be with my 5 fellow colleagues to discuss with you the issues and the impacts that we are seeing in this new normal.
Thank you very much. And next up, I've got Joel Barnes, who's from Tenable.
Hi there, so I'm Joel. I've been with Tenable about 6 years. I was a part of the podcast previously. I currently run the technical team for Tenable, where we sell into other organisations.
Lovely. And then I've got Harley Algowi, who's a security risk manager in international banking.
Yes, hi everyone. Thanks for having me today. This is Hala, working as a regional business information security risk officer for a leading international bank.
Thank you very much. And I've got Joanne Burke from Splunk.
Hello, guys. I'm part of a team called the Security Strategists at Splunk, and we deal with speaking to customers, but also influencing the security products to make sure that they delight our customers. So I'm making this call from Stockholm, but I've been based in London for the last 13 years.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And finally, we've got Zaki from CrowdStrike.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Adarma, for having me on the session today. So, Zaki Tirani, I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Europe, Middle East, and Africa here at CrowdStrike, looking after the overall technology strategy here at CrowdStrike. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much. So, as you can see, we've got this fantastic panel, loads of experience all over the world, and lots of different companies. Over the next 40 minutes, what we're going to be discussing is aligning cybersecurity to your organisation's priorities and then communicating that strategy, most important of all. Using tangible outcomes, risk analysis and hard metrics to speak to the business. And then understanding how processes and the ability to remain operational in the event of a breach needs the support of the entire organisation. At the end of the webinar, we're going to have a Q&A from you. So, please do put your questions in the box below, and hopefully we'll be able to get round to all of them at the end. So without further delay, let's begin. So the first part of this webinar is I've got one question. I'm just going to ask it round to the different panelists and see what we get from there. So with the advent of hybrid working, how will boards and business attitudes to security need to change, particularly in the event of a breach or business interruption? Perhaps I can start with you, Sheryl, and perhaps you can begin by setting that context and talking through what needs to change.
Yeah, Catherine, thank you for that. And I think, as we are all coming back into another phase of new normal, we recognise we've got through the pandemic planning, where business interruption was definitely where were all our employees going to be, and how were we going to manage those employees from a secure perspective, and not wishing to steal any of Halal's thunder, where she's been working in the financial services, a highly regulated organisation as well. We have managed and coped during the pandemic and beyond with business interruptions, which we'd never even thought that we could do. So now what we're finding as we're coming back to the boards and looking at what do breaches mean, what do interruptions to services mean, that we're looking still at that hybrid working where we may have some of our employees on site, We may have some of our employees off-site, but we're having to combine those with processes and risks, which we had probably set for the board with people being on site. So there's a lot of change that we're now playing catch up with. There's lots of things that we're looking at as to how we can accelerate. And we are looking at where our data is. A lot of our organizations, a lot of the clients that we work with in particular, have started to embrace that cloud enablement, so that data that could have perhaps just been on-prem and accessed by people when they were in the office in the old way of working is now in cloud instances. But then we've got that risk that we've got duplicated data as well. So when a breach occurs, how are we bringing ourselves back to point zero? What is it we need to do to mitigate and remediate? And how do we move forward? I've spent lots of time with organizations that they've been in breaches. And I know what it's like when you're in the wheelhouse as the breach is unfurling and you're trying to stop the activities and start to manage that risk, and then begin to articulate that both to employees, to clients, and to shareholders. A new norm is going to be very different as we start to think about what those breaches mean to us as individuals, us as clients, and our organizations. And we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that, certainly in our hybrid way of working as well, our supply chain and our third-party risk activities are also really complex, because some of those clients that may well have their processes, their controls set in place, still have them for when most of the employees were on site. And again, we're in that hybrid way of working. So there's a lot of complexity that we're having to deal with now. Lots of things which may not be in the risk register. Lots of activities that organizations are trying to face as they're pulling together the strategy and the risks that they're prepared to take as they move forward. So when I think about the people, that's been pushed to the forefront in recent months with what's happening with our people, how we're managing our people, that processes and technologies are in some instances playing that catch up. So there's an awful lot of complexity that our boards, our clients, and us as security specialists are dealing with on a daily basis. So having that effective risk register and understanding what we will accept as risks and how we identify those risks are so key and critical.
Thank you very much. And so, what's your take on this, Hala, from your perspective, working within a big international banking organisation?
Thank you. Actually, for me, since I'm working in banking industry, which is considered as a mature industry in the information and cybersecurity, earlier before the pandemic, we used to have this flexibility in working from home. It was available before the pandemic, and all controls, it was in place, and also we invested in additional controls to be there. And let's say we worked on the bandwidth, all this to facilitate the working from home for the colleagues. Earlier, actually, some of processes, it was not allowed to be moved, to be, let's say, operated from outside the bank's premises. That was due to some of regulations in some countries. But after the pandemic, all organizations found themselves, they want to work on this hybrid environment or to work from home due to the issues and the restrictions in the movement. And in order to keep the business running, so they need to facilitate this. So what was not accepted in the past, now it become accepted. And we start seeing some, let's say, industries moving their processes to the cloud, as Charlie mentioned. So earlier, maybe some of organizations, they were not willing to adopt the cloud technology or to go for the digital transformation. But now, most of the banks, they found themselves in order to sustain and to keep running their business, they need to move some of applications to cloud, and they need to enable more processes to be accessible online. Also, different controls got changed. Earlier, we were talking about physical security. We were talking about how to keep, let's say, documents, who has access to that documents and systems. When we moved to the working from home, we found that we need to enable a different controls like the multi-factor authentication. We need to ensure the logs management, it's captured in a right way and covering, let's say, the endpoints, the systems, the VPN connections, all these things. Also, one of important things which we noticed during the pandemic is the huge threat of the ransomware and the third-party risk. And we heard about a lot of incidents occurred. So most of organizations also found themselves, they want to identify their critical third parties and to assess if they are having access to their network or not. They will allow them to continue having access to the network, to the systems, and they need to ensure that the third-party security assessment is in place for them, no gaps in place, and everything is remediated.
Thank you very much. A very interesting perspective from a very, regulated and traditional industry.
Yeah.
And what about you, Johan? What about your experience with Splunk?
Yeah. Thank you for asking. I work for a software company, and I speak to companies all over the world all the time about their security posture and what they can do better in security. And one of the major changes I saw last year with the pandemic and everything was that the new work from home regime that was put into place really forced security, IT, and business teams to work together in a different way in order to ensure the continuity of business. They were working together before, but now it was really forced on them if they wanted to keep the business moving. And that kind of cooperation that I saw, that obviously needs to become a habit. So that's going to be there permanently. Working from home is not really going to go away. It might change a little bit, but working from home, I think, is definitely here to stay for the long run. And what I also saw that sometimes you downgraded the protection levels in order to maintain the business. That's what I saw. And it's not really that strange that happened. There was a lack of preparation for working from home. There was, of course, no one's fault that the pandemic come, and no one could predict that the pandemic would come in that very moment. The whole working from home trend was definitely already happening, but people were predicting it would take 3 to 5 years, not like a couple of months. And so you can't really fault them for that. We should also think that the working from home regime is also drastically increasing the attack surface of a company, to have a term. So basically the risk level for any company where most of the staff work from home is much, much higher. And that is maybe something that has really dawned on everyone a few months after everyone started working from home, and their security controls were all of a sudden breached all the time. And one thing that I think also needs to change is that I think most companies should have some kind of rapid response team whenever we have a large breach like SolarWinds or something like that. It's similar to what we have for PR disasters or workplace accidents. Something happens and you need to respond very, very quickly. You need to put a task force together, do something about the risk. You need to get the communications going. You need to brief the board. All of those things needs to happen almost immediately, even over the weekend. So I think a lot of companies need to adopt that kind of methodology within cyber risk. And I don't think that is really in place for a lot of companies that I speak with. It might be for the large organizations, but it's definitely not there for most of them. We actually did a survey about the SolarWinds hack that everyone talks about. It was so monumentally large that 2 months after that happened, only 47% of CISOs had actually briefed the board about SolarWinds. So only half of the companies we spoke to around 100 companies, have actually spoken to the board about SolarWinds. So this was 2 months after the fact. I think, I don't think that's not a very good number. And I think that kind of attitude needs to change a bit. that's what I've seen. But thank you.
No, that's very interesting. And I think, it goes to show that we've just, that so much has changed during the pandemic. We should have learned, and maybe to a point we have, but there's still much that we could learn. So I think that kind of quite naturally takes us on to the second question. So in this new normal where things have changed, what will be the keys to aligning cybersecurity to an organisation's priorities? And I'll start with you, Zaki, if that's all right on that one.
Yeah, I think there's a number of keys. I think that we're in actually a really good situation right now because the dust has settled. We've actually done a lot of learning from an adversarial perspective. We saw a huge uptick, 15 months ago as we started, working from home. We've seen the adversary become very, very sophisticated and really pivot on their tactics. So from an intelligence perspective, we now understand what the threat actor looks like and their capabilities, which are extremely advanced. So we can use this information to take it to the board and understand what those key needs are going to be. And I think it really comes down to, you mentioned communication. Communication is key. We need to also be able to take that communication and then translate it back to the business. I think there's always been this argument that the board should talk more cyber, but the reality is cyber needs to talk more board. And communication is a key area of this. But then it also comes down to great topics like we need our own visibility. We need to actually understand the work that we've carried out over the last 15 months to get our businesses to where they are today. And then unfortunately, in a lot of situations, organizations have rushed very, very quickly, adopted new technology, taken those great digital transformation projects, but they forgot about security transformation. They forgot about the need to have security being underpinned into everything we do as a business. We no longer run our businesses manually. We are digital businesses, and security needs to be integrated fully at all stages of that. So making sure we're having that communication with the board means we actually are making sure the board understands what we need and require. But I think that also really helps when we start taking this lovely journey we call maturity. When we start off with security, we usually start with the basics. And we need to explain that to the board, explain where we are today and where we want to be. And we shouldn't be ashamed that we may be immature today, because guess what? We have security professionals and partners that can actually boost our maturity straight away. And then by having that right language, it allows us to take them on the journey. I had a conversation with CISO the other week, and he mentioned that he had been doing this great communication to get the board to invest in their security needs to where they'd be able to do some great work. But his problem was, how do we continue to educate the board that we're no longer having breaches? But we still, I think we got to a state where we only tell the board when bad things happen. How often do we tell the board about incidents? Incidents are business as usual for us in security. We should be explaining those incidents and explaining when we're doing good. And again, that's a key area of communication.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and that plays very much to Johann's point earlier about what you communicate. And just from your perspective, there's lots that should be communicated to the board. What should you not say to the board? What do they not want to hear? What doesn't work?
Useless information. I think it's keep it quick and simple, and I think keep it concise, but also reputable, repeatable. So we're utilizing the same language or reporting on the same pieces of information that we're doing on a regular basis. And I think just keep it straight to the point. We are running businesses here. Technology and security is part of that, but it's not the only part of it. And I think making sure we're keeping it straight to the point and precise and repeatable.
Perfect. And I'm going to ask the same question to you, Joel, if that's okay. So how should CISOs communicate security priorities on a business level to the board? What's your take on that?
I think we should probably move it back a little bit before we get there. I'm not going to just do a different question, I hasten to add, but I think one of the areas where I find when I'm talking to the larger customers is that they don't actually understand the business priorities to start with. So when the CISO is trying to put together the security methodology and what they're going to put into an organization or how they're going to change, they're not fully understanding what the actual business priorities are. And if we look over the last sort of 15 months or so, although the method in which all the organizations are actually working, the actual business priorities they've changed slightly, but generally they still tend to revolve around the same things. Unfortunately, of course, we've now got a whole different set of problems sitting underneath that as security professionals to be able to deal with. So we're having to essentially take what we were using as how we communicated, to the board, and saying, here's how we were doing it before, and now having to introduce a whole bunch of other stuff. And what we're seeing is that the sort of priorities are changing massively. It's been referenced by, I think, everybody on the call so far, that people are now becoming a far bigger priority. If we look at the types of attacks that are taking place, it's not, I mean, there are still the usual sort of, we're hacking into an organization, but people are still the problem. And if we look at that as an issue, when we've now expanded the working from home, we're starting to have BYOD coming in. We've got less control over things. Even, if we start throwing VPNs about and all that sort of stuff, with the best will in the world, we have people who have access to huge amounts of stuff doing convenient things. We look at a variety of different places, and it's not just security, where we can see that the way people are working is they're still continuing to try and work exactly the same way without any understanding of the impact of that. So what do we do about that as security professionals? Is we have to try and essentially take those business processes and break them down into what's most key. So what is, if a business goal is we need to grow sales by 20%, something really basic like that. On a security level, how is that impact? What's the root problem on a security level of that? What does 20% mean? Is it on a particular product line? Is it a cost of sale problem? Do we have to look at bottom line, top line? What is it? And so we have to kind of verify what the business goals actually mean, because a lot of business goals are quite basic, shall we say. Do better, sell more, make more money, those sorts of things. Security has to underpin all of that. And how we talk about it and what we put in front of the board has to essentially dovetail in with that. Typically, we see, I tend to work on the technical side, but we're trying to promote technical stuff into board. The biggest problems we always have, over dataizing it. We're putting so much in front of someone, they don't quite know what it is, or we've got 15 slides to explain it. I think Zaki put it right there. Consistency and simplicity are the key things. So what are you doing? Are you understanding that it fits with the business so that this is a thing, the root cause of a problem that's going to impact multiple business lines? That's the thing we can focus on. Where are we? Are we red? Are we amber? Are we green? Rather than we're at 62%. What does that mean? So there's a lot of different communication things. Bright colors tend to work for senior level people, I find.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. So do you determine with the board what metrics should be covered before you work with them on the green, amber, red scenario? How do you get there?
I think there's a bunch of stuff that we can work on. I mean, there's some fairly standard stuff that we need to do, but there's also the fact that absolutes are quite hard. There are certain things that you can do absolutes for quite easily. So if you're running a cloud service, downtime, fairly simple. What's the downtime as a cost per hour or cost per minute on things like that? But there's also a matter of, the sort of comparison side of things as well. So, how do we compare with the market? How were we from last time? But if we look at those basics, things like cyber hygiene, making sure that we know where everything is, visibility, cyber hygiene, third party, I think was mentioned as well, supply chain there. All of those things are fairly standard that will impact any business. And then there's the sort of icing on the top, which is what's most appropriate for your business specifically, based on what you do. That's the one that, from where I stand, I can't have a huge impact on. Because I don't fully understand that part of the business. But that's the more difficult one, and it requires a conversation. And I think what really needs to come down here is that there is a two-way thing. Yes, we have to communicate into a board, great, but it's all stuff that happens before you get to that point of communicating into the board, making sure you're understanding, verifying that you understand with the right people, and not just one person, but does everybody understand it? So we're all aligned, because that's where you get the tone from the top, which then gets the rest of the organization trying to understand and be part of that problem as well.
And so do you think from all that, there are things which really are particularly difficult for the board to understand? Because there's lots of the cybersecurity things which are, you know, quite universal across the board, as you mentioned, in a way, but aren't necessarily something that the board particularly understands, but they're universally acknowledged within the cyber community. So you can go, here we go. And then you've got the things that, as you say, they're specific to the individual business, which presumably the board has a better understanding of in lots of ways because it's their business. So are there things, though, that leap out as particularly difficult to communicate? And do you have any advice on that?
I think, I don't know whether I have any advice on it. I think the problem with, I mean, we've had a problem with security generally, which is it's an insurance industry. Ultimately, it's a, you know, I'm in a vendor, so we sell stuff that makes you feel better about yourself. And if something were to go wrong, you're reducing the risk of that happening. If nothing goes wrong, how do we communicate to a board that you spent all this money and nothing happened? Is that good? Is it bad? If we hadn't spent the money, would it still have happened, or still not have happened? And so you have that insurance problem that I always see, which is we spent £5 million on X and I've got what to show for it. So that sort of return on the investment is a very difficult one to articulate. We can all say where the problems lie and where we need investment. How we then prove that return, that's the biggest problem that I see.
Yeah, very interesting point. And over to you, Sheryl. What's your take on the key to aligning cybersecurity to organisations' priorities and all of that stuff around board communication that comes with it?
So I agree with what Joel and Zaki have said earlier, but I think understanding at the board level what the impacts are. So if I'm making widgets, and if, you know, as Joel said, I've got my insurance policy, but I can't make my widgets, or I can make my widgets, but I can't pack them and get them somewhere else. Really being able to articulate what cyber does and the risks that will occur is often the most powerful way of getting that board to say, well, from a minute's delay, I know I've got 7 widgets that are being produced. From a day's delay, I know I've got a swimming pool's worth of widgets that are being produced. And then bringing that into each one of the individuals, the employees and the third parties, of understanding the part that they play and the risk that they are providing in that supply chain for us. So I think, you know, the comments that we've made is sometimes it is difficult to get that mind share at the board, because the board believe that cyber will keep us safe. We've got a cybersecurity team. They're going to keep us safe. They're going to keep the bad guys out, and, you know, they're going to stop them getting in and keep them out. But actually what we need to say is, okay, well, if they do get in, what does that mean to us? And what do we need to do? And what's the impact to us as a business? And I think, you know, we talked about priorities, but I think it's strategic imperatives that we have to, as cybersecurity specialists, understand from the board's perspective. What's the strategic imperative that the board will want to do, or the senior leaders will want to do in these organizations, come what may? Is it to continue to produce widgets, or do whatever they need to do, come what may? Because when there is an incident, when there is an impact, everyone's attention is drawn away to that. And what do we need to do to keep the lights on in some of those other parts? And what do we need to understand are our strategic areas that we need to support on? So never an easy conversation to have with board members, or those that are signing off the checks, because, yeah, why do we need another spanky piece of equipment? You've just had £5 million worth of equipment, as Ziki's just said. But it's understanding what's the impact if we don't have this, and being able to articulate this in that particular way. You know, if we think about Halal and the work that she does every single day in a highly regulated financial services organization, she not only has the board to think about, but she's also got her college of regulators, who are fantastic people to have to work with at the best of times, that all are asking, you know, the financial services industry to maintain certain sets of regulations and controls. But that's the same as we should have in any organization. We should understand what the risks are that we're prepared to accept, and then what the mitigations are, but what it is that we need to do just to keep the lights on, and the impact if we can't keep those lights on. So if I've got a swimming pool worth of widgets because I haven't been able to box them up and supply them off today, what does that mean if I can't do that tomorrow? And what does that mean to me, who I might be a call center person in the middle of something? How do I get that information back down as to the impact that I play, or the part that I play if I see something which I think isn't right? And that's the important part as well. It's not in that top up, but it's that bottom down view, so that everyone understands the role and the significant role that they play in actually keeping the organization safe and secure.
That's interesting. So really we're going back to the specifics of that business and what it means through each of those layers of the organisation. And how do you maintain that continued attention to the whole organisation to keep that alignment going once that initial thing's been explained to the board?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what the regular security awareness programs need to drive through the organization. And yes, we'll find that, at the start of the pandemic, there were lots of things about, what do you need to do for working from home? How do you need to make sure that your information is secure? And now we're into what we consider new norm. How many times have we had a reiteration of the security policy? It's now becoming that normal, so it's probably once a year. So I think your point is really well made there, that what we have to do is make sure that we are looking at where impacts or incidents occur, bringing that back into our own organisation, doing that what if that happened to us scenario, and then what's our education process that we need to provide, what's the activities that we need to provide to enable us to continue to learn and continues to be on the front foot. I don't know who it was, someone was saying about the adversaries, they are getting, as sophisticated. Every time we move forward, they move 2 steps forward. They do webinars like us going, okay, what can we do? What can we try? We tried this, it didn't work. We need to keep ahead of the game. And we absolutely need to share that information that we see. So we're using, lessons learned and leading practice from other industries, other areas, and other incidents that occur.
Thank you very much. So, as a follow-on from that, and very much just moving through that big question of how we get there. What tangible outcomes, risk analysis, and hard metrics resonate most strongly with the board? And I'll start with you, Hala, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, one of the outcome or the tangible outcomes that can be presented to the board is the risk appetite metrics. Okay, so first of all, they have approved the risk appetite, okay, at the beginning of the year, and we keep tracking the risk appetite. Also, if we are having a risk map for the organization, where do we stand? What are the threats, the outside threats? What is the biggest risk we are having in the bank? Where do we have, let's say, some weaknesses? Where do we want to invest more in implementing some security controls? What is the level of the employees' awareness in this organization in the ICS field? Do they know how to protect the data? Do they know how to protect the infrastructure? Are they aware, let's say, how to spot phishing emails? Are they aware about the ICS risk, and what does that mean? Why do we need to, let's say, connect to a VPN when we accessing the bank's information, or when we are using, let's say, the bank's devices? And why we don't want to share let's say, the bank's information or the organization informations with others or with the family and all these things. So the awareness, it's something very important, and we need to raise it also to the board. If we are having, let's say, a simulation exercises taking place, also the results to be shared with the board. And one advice when we talk to the board, we need to stress in two things. First of thing, they need to understand that no organization is 100% secured. Even all efforts it's being made, let's say if we are having a budget to implement a different projects, ICS projects or controls, that will not, let's say, secure we are 100% secured organization, because some of organizations got hacked and some organization will be hacked, but no one, let's say, is 100% secured. And also when we talk to the board, we need to use a simple language, because as you mentioned earlier, they are not a technical person and they might not understand what we are talking about. Okay, or if I go to them and they say MFA or multi-factor authentication, they will not understand what does that mean. But if I start giving them an example, okay, for the MFA, then they will understand it in a better way. Also, they will help us, let's say, in providing us with a budget or the buy-in to implement the ICS program in the organization.
And is it difficult to get that's almost that simple information, simple metrics, simple things that have got enough weight to share with them? Is it how do you get those things? Is it easy, difficult, medium?
Yeah, see, actually, for them, they are considering two things, or they want two information. If I'm talking to them, let's say, I keep saying phishing, and without providing them with a number of the phishing emails that has been captured by our tools. If they don't know it, then they will say, it's a theories, And if you keep saying something without giving them a numbers, and how do you measure it in the organization itself, they will not understand it, or they will not, let's say, accept your request if you are asking for any buy-in or budget or whatsoever. So you need to provide them with some numbers, and also link it with let's say, the risk behind not implementing this control, let's say, or if we are in a breach, okay, and something happened, okay, and a breach happened, or a business interruption happened, what is the consequences for this risk? They need to understand it and put it in their mind, so they can take a better decisions on that.
I see. Simplifying it, but not simplifying it too much.
Yeah, not that much, but you need to give them sometimes numbers. If you are having a benchmark, where do we stand compared to other, let's say, organizations in the same market, or in the region or other markets. So it would be better for them. Sometimes they don't like to go on details. If, let's say, you go and explain, let's say, SolarWinds hacking, what happened. If you go and start giving them some details, they might not understand it in a better way. But you need to make it very simple for them. Just bullet points. What was the threats? How that happened? And what do we have in the organization in controls that, let's say, prevents such incident to occur in our organization, to give them some comfort, let's say, because at the end they need to make sure you don't want to panic them, right? So you need to give them some comfort. So I need to raise their awareness about this threat, but at the same time I need to give them some comfort. I'm having this, I'm having that, or I have this gap. So if they know I'm aware about my gaps, also it would be good for them. Why? Because if you identified your gaps, then you are having a remediation plan, or you will be having a remediation plan, and you can give that comfort to them.
Thank you very much. So over to you, Joanne, if that's okay. So specific metrics, risk analysis, you know, hard numbers resonate most powerfully with the board, and how do you get those numbers?
Well, I mean, I love metrics. I work for a data company, so that's not so surprising. I mean, everyone uses metrics every day, professionals and laymen in everyday life. I mean, think about, I don't know, share price. It's a single value metric, you know, it's a number on a ticker, but it translates into so many other things like market cap and investor demand. And looking at that single number over time, it also yields some insight where the company came from, where it's going. You might be able to trade on it, right? But it tells a story just with one single number. So it's actually really, really crucial. And if you move that to information security, I see an appetite for the board to get more transparency about the current and historical risk level and the current and historical attack surface area, which changes over time. And all of these things, and like change events, so say if you make a change to the company that affects the risk in some meaningful way, these change events and everything that I talked about before, they should be expressed in standard risk terms. I think Zaki mentioned that we need to learn how to speak board, and I think that completely resonates with me, and it resonates with what I've heard from our customers, that you need to, with risk events, risk language, I mean, using language like prevent, mitigate, transfer, accept, you know, those kind of risk concepts, and applying that to cybersecurity. And we need to really get them to understand these things, because I mean, they won't be speaking lead speak like we do. It needs to be board speak. And they all have different priorities. So when you speak to different boards and different CISOs, it's difficult to give generalized advice what type of metric is the best one, because it will be different for every single company. We struggle as a company to produce these generalized metrics that, you know, all our customers would love. But instead, we try to make it easy as possible for people to create their own metrics that really resonates with them. And Harley, you mentioned loads of really, really good metrics that apply to your organization, and they might be generalizable across, you know, finance as a whole. But one successful generalized approach to creating these risk indicators I've seen is to assign risk scores or risk modifiers, or like some kind of risk number to the lowest possible entity in a company. And when I say entity here, I mean like a username or user or human or a device or something like that. Assigning risk to them whenever something happens. And you can then aggregate these risks over various classifications. So say, I don't know, malware, like threat types, malware or phishing. You can also aggregate it then over functional areas, say email, how many email risky events have I had? And that could become a score. But you can also aggregate it even higher to say, you know, user data or application or, you know, things like that. Just aggregating these numbers into different areas that make sense to the audience. And if you have an asset inventory, so basically where you know where your devices and your users are or where they work, which I totally recommend everyone to have. I know it's a tall ask sometimes, but if you have something, you can then aggregate risk over, say, geolocations or business units. And you can then, you know, bubble that up higher and higher and higher. And at the highest possible level, you can then create a merged or an ensemble scoring for these different risks into one single number. That could be anything from 0 to 100. You can decide yourself. And that can then be tracked, tracked somewhere in real time. And that number will then tell a story about the risk level of the company, where it's going, where it's coming from. And if you want to know more, you can then obviously split it by all of these different functional areas that I talked about. Is it email, or is it in China, or is it in the UK, or whatever? And kind of a concept like that, actually, I've seen that becoming successful in many companies. And what it does is that it abstracts away all of that technical mumbo jumbo that the board doesn't understand. So, you know, detection logic or machine learning or vulnerability CVEs or patch status and all of those technical things that they probably won't understand. It's abstracted away and converted into some kind of number. And of course, you can translate the number into red, amber, green if you want to go completely abstract and just have a color. That's okay too. Because I think the worst thing you can do is throwing a bunch of metrics that are technical in nature to a board, because they will just go over their head. They won't understand it, and they will stop listening. And in the worst case scenario, you will lose the audience, right? But you might also lose their trust. And that's really, you don't want to lose the trust between the cybersecurity professionals on the board, because then everything is kind of lost that way. So it's a big responsibility for you as a cybersecurity professional to do this communication really well, but you also need to implement a way that is kind of easily understandable, in a way similar to what I described there, where you just bubble up risks into these indicators that almost anyone can understand. 100 is bad, 0 is good in terms of risk, right? So I think that's the concept I've seen with, at least with my customers.
No, I think that's fantastic advice, because, as you say, there's so much nuance within all of these different organisations, but it's a way of literally saying to a board, our score is 1 to 100. At the moment we're on 75, so you should be worried, and then they understand.
Yeah.
And that's, that makes perfect sense, because it builds in that nuance. And so I'd like to turn that same question over to you, Zaki, if that's okay. What's your view on risk analysis and tangible metrics? And
so first of all, I completely agree with what everyone said so far. You may have not seen me, I was nodding my head quite furiously there. But I think one of the biggest points we kind of forget, especially in security, is that the metrics that we're supposed to be pointing to the board are supposed to be actionable items to make business decisions. Now, the unfortunate problem is, typically when we go to the board, we're asking for something, we're presenting them a load of data, and that data is usually about a couple of months old. So it's no longer really actionable. We're really chasing battles that we were attempting to solve, maybe a quarter ago, maybe even a year or 2 years ago. So the biggest problem we have when we talk about metrics and security is really a data problem. We haven't got the right access to the right data sets. We're not using the right data in the right kind of way. We're not getting access to that information. We're not getting the right intelligence to actually understand that data in a better sense. And without having all of that kind of visibility and that data at our beck and call, we won't really get access to the right metrics necessary for us to have the right conversations with the board in the first place. And I think we've kind of said this a few times, we really should be having the right conversations. We don't get invited to the board very much. For a lot of organizations, maybe they only get invited occasionally, or maybe it's their first meeting. And we need to be extremely effective with this communication, and extremely effective this time, which means we have to be extremely effective with those metrics. And I love some of the ideas that's been shared around on this call already, how to simplify that information. And I completely agree with this. I think it was Joel who mentioned, colors or simple methodologies to actually show what we need to do. Is this a risk to business? Is this a risk that we may want to visit next time? Or do you know what? We're actually doing okay. One element that does concern me is the use of numbers. And I think numbers, although in metrics we're so frequently like to use them, but actually can give the wrong information at a board level. One example would be is, let's say we've stopped 50,000 attacks in this last week. That's a great number. It sounds really sophisticated. It sounds like we're doing a really good job. But we as security professionals don't care about the 50,000 that's been prevented. We care about the one that got through. And that one means so much more to our organization than that 50,000. But unfortunately, we get too sidetracked and siloed across the big number. But the reality is, how do we really represent that to the board? And I've mentioned it a few times, it's about actually understanding what those attacks actually mean to your business. And I think Hala had a great method, and she was explaining it there, risk mapping, the risk appetite of the business. These are all very, very technical business information that we as cybersecurity professionals should understand, which allows us to take the technical cyber information and correlate together. A great example would be, if we know that there's been a ransomware outbreak or targeting certain organizations, utilizing a certain vulnerability, and guess what? Our most critical asset that we have a very minimal risk appetite is using that technology. We know straight away that we're in a situation that we need to be very actionable on and rectify it as quickly as possible. We've suddenly taken that technical data and able to put it into a very simple score or metric to the board going, this is bad, this is red, we need to do something, and here's the background information, context for the reasons behind it. But without having that data in the first place, having that data quickly and effectively and available to us, we can't make those actionable metrics happen.
It's very interesting and very, adding lots of nuance to this very big story. And can I turn that over to you, Joel, please?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. Everyone sort of said lots of really, really cool stuff, which all is kind of bubbling around in my head for stuff that I sort of thought, oh, that's a great new way of looking at it. I think one thing that seems to have sort of come through all of this is a very simple one, which is the visibility problem. And it's not just us knowing, where every single bit of our IT kit is. It's about knowing the interactions between all those things, and then where they fit within the business process, and where then that fits within the people who are doing these things. So when we start to look at the key things we need to put in front of a board about, say, risk, there's some very difficult sort of pieces we need to pull together. I mean, I think the first thing is that anyone who says they know what they've got in their organization is a great big liar, in no uncertain terms. No one does. There is always something in some bit of the organization. Someone's thrown something under a desk in the old school way, or they've spun up something in the cloud, or they've got a workload there's lots of things that are happening all the time. And every time there is something that you are not aware of, it's a risk, because it's not controlled. You don't know what it is, and unknowns are a problem. So getting that visibility is a key sort of thing. Now, how you put that into a metric, that's a more difficult one, because you can't say, hey, I know about 72% of my organization, because if you know about 72%, then you also know the 28. So there's a fluffiness there. But if you can start saying that of the organization that I know, these are the business processes that the board have said are the key things that we're looking at, and these are the bits of infrastructure that are supporting those, and you can put a risk rating attached to those. I mean, Zaki mentioned, there's a critical vulnerability on a database. That database is supporting our order processing system. That's something that's very easy to put in front of board and say, this is a red risk that we can put in front of it, sad face with down arrow, that sort of stuff, to say that that is a key thing. So contextualizing it there is critical. But I think it's not just looking at the sort of the standard business processes, but also the way that the way that just generally businesses run, and the people who interact with systems create problems, and trying to communicate that one to the board is an issue. So if we think, I run an organization of like 50 odd people, and unfortunately people resign, or fortunately, depending on the person who's resigning, but generally someone resigns, someone comes in, they are then put into a group somewhere, or they're created within the organization. They then receive a whole bunch of things, and the people who give them those things are not security professionals. There's someone who presses a button and says, this person is a administrator, click, and suddenly they've got this sort of all these God rights that they might have, and suddenly you've got this new person, untested, untried, as a thing within the organization. So it's not just about the IT piece, it's about the interaction between the IT, the people, and the business. So putting those things together allows you to give a sort of, here's what the business is trying to do, here are the components, and then you can give risk ratings to those individual things. Then you can start being a little bit more sort of holistic in the view of these things. But the root of it all is, what is the visibility that we've got? And that is, for me, if we can't see it, we're not in a good place.
Thank you very much. And what about you? What about you, Sheryl, on the same question?
Yeah, I think if we're thinking about the tangible outcomes, we mustn't lose sight of the fact that for the board, they often only have a very short period of time to discuss these things at the board meetings. They might only get, might only be able to put 2 A4 pieces of paper together. So what we need to do is to understand the bits that we want to educate them on for noting. As Halal was saying, our risk register, where is it this month compared to last month? What do we have as an uptick, smiley face or sad face? And that's for you for noting. We had 50,000 near misses, note that, but here's the actionable part that we want you to look at. We had 2 incidents, and these were the impacts to these incidents. So really being able to define that, coming back to the strategic imperatives that the board are looking for, understanding where our risks are, and providing them the actionable things that they need to do, as opposed to those things that we need to give them for noting, and keeping them informed as to how we are managing the business and keeping it within the risks that the board have set and the tolerances that the board have set, is the most critical thing. Because the reality is that they will all go and talk to their fellow CEOs or CFOs or whoever else that they might come in, and they might go, hey, have you heard the one about, cloud? And the next thing you know, coming back down from the board is, I'd like you to investigate our cloud, because I think we might be, because that's the word that's going around, the forums that are there. But we have to make sure that we are articulating in a way that they know the bits that they need to be worried about, but they also know the bits that we've done, which is part of our job. And that's what they pay us to do. And that's why we're keeping the organisation safe and secure. And the other thing, which is really important for us as individuals, as security individuals, is to give the board a view of what's coming down the track. Not what's the here and now, but what's coming down the track as well. What's that future, the futurology view that they need, that they will have to get themselves comfortable with as well, because that's going to change the risk. It's going to change the risk mitigation. It's going to change the way that the business thinks about risk as well. So lots for the board to think about, and lots that they have to make decisions on really quickly. And sometimes with a very, very high level, 36,000 feet helicopter view of information that's been provided upwards. And Joanne was talking about, how the real detail gets moved up. Sometimes, we're asking these individuals to make that snap decision with a very high level part of information. It's on us to ensure that they have all of the areas around risk, tolerance, competencies that they can to make those decisions with everything.
Thank you very much. We are very, very nearly out of time, and we've covered so much ground. But now, to strip out all nuance from everything, I was just going to ask you for one final piece of advice on how to make a DNR response part of decision making. So just quickly round everyone, and just your one piece of advice. So I'll run in the order we started in. So if I can start with Harla, if that's okay.
Thank you. Actually, small advice, just be clear and transparent with the board. Tell them, where do we stand? Where do we want to reach? And how we will reach there.
Perfect. And what about you, Johan?
I think I want to go to Zaki's point there, but that what we're seeing here is, for the most part, a data problem. We need to give people access to data in a timely manner, and accurate data in a timely manner, and also make it easy to understand. I think that's been the whole conversation here, really. How do we communicate complicated concepts in an easy, understandable way? And just solving that problem is probably my number one advice. Solve the data problem.
Thank you. What about you, Zaki?
Yeah, so my simple advice would be to prepare for a cyber incident response or breach today, get budget allocated today, because it's so much cheaper to invest in it earlier than to invest in it after an actual breach. So make your investments, get your plans in place today, not tomorrow.
Very sound advice. And what about you, Joel?
I think I take it back a little bit and say that if we're putting this to the board, DNR is a cost to the business. It's a cost to mitigate a further cost. If we can get ahead of that cost or reduce the impact of that, then we can get a lot more investment into these things. Explaining very clearly why it's a problem, the cost impact it has, and then what the cost impact of doing it up front, as Zaki said, do it early. It costs a lot less, and you can get a lot more going with that, which will help us as security professionals provide a better service to the business.
Perfect. And Sheryl, what about you?
I think my advice to the board is, what do you want to be famous for? Is it for leading the board and the organisation through to success, or having, as Zaki's just said, an outage or an impact or an issue into the business which you weren't prepared for, because that is a very difficult place to come back from as members of the board, where you're actually faced with that to answer, why weren't we aware? Why hadn't we planned? Why hadn't we taken Zaki's advice and got our disaster recovery, business continuity, implementation planning in place beforehand? But yeah, what do they want to stand for? What is their legacy that they are going to leave? And detection and response is a way of making sure that they're proactively understanding and maintaining their strategic imperatives.
I think there's an awful lot for everybody to be thinking about from all this, and a lot to take away. But thank you so much for all the speakers for sharing your advice. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, and I hope everybody at home's enjoyed the webinar. Just a quick reminder, this session will be available on demand from tomorrow. Do look below the video to listen to all of the recent podcasts, and we've got so many fantastic speakers on those, and there's a set of 4, and you can, listen to them in the car or whatever, you're not sort of came to your desk. So thank you very much for joining us, taking part. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.